Hello everyone. As you can probably see by the slide, this is subject exploration seminar that we're doing today. It's a joint Oxford and Cambridge session. We're going to start with some introductions. We're actually going to go through a PowerPoint today, and we're going to do all kinds of different exciting things. So I am Joe. I'm the schools officer from Brasenose College, Oxford, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi everyone, I'm Katharine and I'm the Schools Liaison Officer at St Catherine's College, part of the University of Cambridge.
And we also have some experts with us. So we have some current undergraduates who've got incredible insights into the world of subject exploration, I'm hoping, and we'll get them to introduce themselves, I think. So we'll go for first name alphabetical order.
Right, my name's Alex, so I'm guessing I'm first there. I study physical natural sciences at St Catherine's College. I'm in my second year. I'm at the moment doing a lot of physics and obviously a lot of maths at the same time, but I also did a lot of chemistry in my first year and at the end of secondary school as well. And I'm from Birmingham.
Right, realized I was next in the alphabet. My name is Fran, and I'm a second year student studying medicine at Oxford Brasenose College, and I'm actually from Coventry, which is not too far from Birmingham, so representing West Midlands. And for my A-levels, I did maths, chemistry and biology and psychology for AS as well.
Hi, I'm Gus. I'm a second year also at Brasenose in Oxford. I study PPE, so that's philosophy, politics and economics, and I'm from North Yorkshire.
Hiya, my name is Jonathan. I'm a second year engineer from Catz, and I'm from the north, a place called Darlington, near Durham.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I am a third year languages student at St Catherine's College, Cambridge. I do French and German, and I am from Tadcaster in North Yorkshire as well.
I'm Matthew. I'm a second year geographer at Brasenose. I'm from Guildford and down south. For my A-levels, I did geography, maths, English lit and Spanish.
Thanks everyone. I'm going to be leading the first part of this session, and then Joe's going to take you through some examples of critical thinking and of subject exploration with our students. But first, just to kind of give an overview of why we think it's really important that you carry out subject exploration, I'm going to go through some of the key reasons why we think you should really be thinking about exploring your academic interests outside of school. Whether or not you're applying to Oxbridge, this is something that can really help you develop the skills that you need for university and that you'll need for university applications, especially if you're considering competitive universities where there are often, quite a few people applying per place available. You might also find when you're kind of going through these, like doing any reading or doing anything that's exploring your subject outside of school, that it helps you narrow down your university subject choice as well. So it might be that you think there's a subject that you kind of set on studying at university, but actually when you start spending time looking at outside of school, you're not enjoying it as much. And that can be a sign that maybe that's not the right avenue to go down, or there's something that you really love about your subject that you hadn't really considered before, and then you actually realise that this is a subject that you'd like to study at university. And we're hoping that by doing the subject exploration, it's going to give you great stuff to talk about on your personal statement. So when you're applying to university, it's going to give you those skills for actually university style, that independent learning that you do at university that's such a big part of your degree. And then also giving you things that you can speak about maybe at university interviews as well, and giving you that experience of talking about things that aren't just within your school curriculum. It might also frame an EPQ, so that's an extended project qualification, which some students do. And if you have the opportunity to do that, then you might find that subject exploration is a great way to kind of get some ideas for an EPQ and to frame that. And lastly on here, we really hope that this will actually be fun. These are kind of subjects that you're considering studying at university, so something that you might study for 3 or 4 years, even 6 years. So we're hoping that you having a look at the kind of things that you could do at university in your spare time might actually be fun at the end of the day. And I hope our student helpers here would agree with me that it can be fun. So what do we actually mean when we're talking about subject exploration? Some of you might have heard it also called SuperCurricular Activities. So this is different to extracurricular activities, which I'm sure you've definitely heard of, which is things like playing football, or maybe being on the student council, maybe playing an instrument. But supercurricular activities is ways in which you're exploring your academic interests outside of just what you have to do on your school course, so outside of your kind of compulsory learning. It could be books. A lot of people assume it's going to be reading, but there are loads of different ways that you can carry out this subject exploration. And we're going to have a look at lots of them today and give you some ideas, and also talk you through how you can be making the most of those resources. So I've got quite a lot of examples on here, which are the kind of things people might use for supercurricular engagement, for subject exploration, but we're not prescriptive with the types of things that you do. We really want it to be led by you. I think I'll pick on our student helpers at this point. If a couple of you, especially, I think students often find it most difficult to find something for physical science subjects to do as a supercurricular activity. So perhaps if at least one physical science student, so like engineering or physical natural sciences, could give some examples of some of the supercurricular activities that they did when they were kind of in year 12 or 13.
I think I can say a couple of things about that. Well, firstly, I think that, you know, as Kathryn mentioned, an EPQ would be a great thing to do in that area. Just kind of finding something that you're, you know, maybe slightly interested in, maybe something that you've picked up on in a lesson, and then just, you know, going deeper and finding out about things that people are, you know, actually researching nowadays would be a great kind of foot in the door, as it were, for that. Secondly, there's a few resources online that were free that I used quite a lot in my sort of year 12 sixth form. One of them, Khan Academy, can't recommend enough. There's, you know, thousands of videos from all sorts of people on there that are very, very good. Another one, Isaac Physics, which I think is actually organized by the physics department at the University of Cambridge. There's sort of collaborations with other places, which has not just some little pages explaining some concepts in physics, chemistry, maths. I think there's a computer science bit now as well. But there's also lots of kind of practice questions on there that can be very helpful for just general A-level revision. There's also some which go a bit beyond A-level topics. And also I found it very useful in preparation for my interview. So there's that as well.
Just to add to that as well, there's a book called Professor Povey's Perplexing Problems or something like that. I'll link it in the chat. That's very similar. I want to study engineering.com, which is one of the pictures down there, is great for, these are both the kind of interview style questions, just to get you thinking in that kind of frame. And then also just go to public lectures, I'd say, especially now that more and more of them are online because of COVID. They're a really easy, accessible way of kind of showing your interest.
Thanks very much. I think I'll also quickly pick on Maddie as someone who's doing an art subject, so French and German. Obviously, it'd be quite different to something like engineering. So what was something that you really enjoyed looking at?
Well, I think for a subject like French and German, which is very literature heavy, it's pretty obvious that reading and reading literature, reading books, which are, you know, novels and fiction, is something that you could do. So the easiest way to think about it, I think, is rather than trying to read all the books a certain author has written or something like that, just because they're like a big name, instead you should try and think, okay, what do I like to read in English? What do I think is actually genuinely interesting? And then try and find like one or two books around that time period or around that kind of theme or whatever it may be. And then you might actually find you enjoy the reading rather than forcing yourself to do it. Another thing I would say, and their logo is on the screen right now, is that Radio 4 is an absolute goldmine. So there are all sorts of things on that. There are, In Our Time, for example, has loads of episodes which concentrate on figures from history or books and things like that. So definitely check out Radio 4 and see what you can find on there, either from the past or from more recently. And I set up a French cinema club at my school. So I was in year 13, and year 12s, I forced them to come and watch French films with me on a Tuesday lunchtime. And I bribed them with food. But that was also quite interesting, because then we could talk about the films, and that gave me some material for my personal statement as well. Yeah, so I'm sure that applies to other humanities subjects in some way.
Thanks so much, Maddie. There were a couple of kind of key resources that Joe and I mentioned in a webinar that we gave in January that I know he is going to copy and paste the links to in the chat. And these are basically lists of different ideas for supercurricular activities that Oxford and Cambridge have put together. So again, we're not saying these are things you have to do, but if you're really struggling for like, where would I start? Someone's asked about computer science, for example, or where would I start for economics? I mean, first of all, search engines are your friends, so definitely do have a little look at, economics podcasts, free computer science YouTube videos, but also you can go on to these resources that Joe's sharing in the chat and have a look via subject to see what's recommended for your subject, and if there's anything on there that you could use as a starting point. Hopefully you'll find some of those things interesting. But as this next slide is going to kind of emphasize, we really want this to be your choice, and that the things that you do are really coming from your interests. So when it comes to actually finding a passion and finding a supercurricular activity, think about a subject that you enjoy at school, or think about a topic that you've maybe heard of on the news or in a documentary or in one of your lessons that you haven't had the chance to explore properly in your own time. So really pick that thing that you enjoy, and then take your own time outside of school. Joe will chat a bit about how you can do this later, to look at this subject and think about it in your own way. No one's prescribing a certain amount of time to this. You can take as long as you like, or you can do something a short amount of time as you like, but really just have a look at it in your own time, come to your own conclusion, and enjoy looking at that and really follow your interests. So I know all these questions coming in and people are like, oh, what should I do for PPE? What should I do for languages? Like we've been saying, it can be so many different things that you really don't have to think that you've just got to go with, the things that our students here today have said that they liked, or things that you've seen on the list of supercurricular activities that we're sharing with you. If your kind of passion is very niche and isn't on that list, that's absolutely fine. We really want you to go with that. And people at universities, so when they're looking at personal statements, or if they're chatting to you in interviews, they're going to really know whether the things that you're talking about that you've done, and whether it's things that you felt like you kind of just had to do, or whether it's something that actually you really enjoy doing, and that you kind of demonstrate in your enthusiasm for the subject, which is something that universities really want to see.
Okay, thanks very much. Hopefully you can hear me. Kathryn will start shouting at me if you can't hear. So what I'd like to do, if you go on to the next slide, Kathryn, thanks, is to try and just delve a little bit deeper into how you might go about doing some of this stuff that we're talking about. And I'm also going to go through, rather ambitiously, an example of some critical thinking, because I think that kind of focused thinking might really help you. But before I do that, I really enjoyed hearing from Alex and Jonathan and Maddie, I think, about just some of their top tips. And looking at the chat, there's quite a few people saying, what's your top tips for medicine and things like that. So I think I'd just love briefly to hear from Fran, Guss and Matthew, just on the things that they really enjoyed reading. So maybe starting with Fran, what did you do for extracurricular stuff for medicine? What did you read and what did you do that some of our students might copy?
Yeah, so I was actually about to type my answer out, but I found that there was just so many different resources and areas to explore. And I think Kathryn made a really good point as to, like, you can explore whatever you want as long as you enjoy it, and regardless of how niche it is, the admissions tutors will definitely see that the most important thing is your interest and passion for that thing. So for me, when I was doing my A-level course, when we were doing kind of cardiology and looking at the heart in biology, I found that quite interesting, and I went on to do a bit more reading on that, and I actually stumbled across Future Learns. I think the the icon was on the previous slide, but FutureLearns is such an amazing place where you can essentially do free courses in whatever you want. And there is a feature where you can pay for it and get a certificate, but you know, you don't have to do that. I didn't do that. I just did the free course and I really enjoyed it. And I learned a lot more about cardiology. And then I went on to read loads and loads of interesting books. And if you want, I can actually put in the chat the list of books that I think Oxford recommend, like really good reading books. There are some more academic books, there are some more pop science books, but it was a really kind of informative list. I also found myself reading a lot of kind of magazines. So a really popular one is New Scientist, and these can be quite expensive. So I found that a good way of getting it for free or for cheap is actually going through your schools or your libraries. They often have like a budget to pay, especially if it's like for academic reasons. You can actually ask them to subscribe as a school to magazines. So I use that, and I used to read New Scientist articles here and there, and you actually find that you come across one really interesting thing or new innovation in science that you can actually kind of delve in deeper. And yeah, a lot of YouTube for me. I prefer watching videos as to reading, which is quite bad of me, but I found that watching really interesting videos such as Crash Course Science was quite amazing, and you end up kind of discovering about new things in really engaging ways. So I'll put the link to everything in the chat function. Yeah.
Thanks very much. That's brilliant. Guss, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I think one of the things with PPE is there's slightly different subjects in how I approached them before university. So I think for politics and economics, you're probably not going to be accessing a lot of material, which is like, you wouldn't want to get out like an undergraduate textbook or something, because you're probably not going to enjoy reading that in terms of sparking your initial interest. But both of them have got a really good set of books that are written for kind of popular audience at a level of introducing you to the subject. So I know stuff like Freakonomics gets a good rep, and I read a book by an economist called Ha-Jun Chang called Economics: The User's Guide, which I enjoyed, and both of them are doing kind of interesting stuff about setting the scene. And then I found that once I've read a couple of those introductory books, you can really pick up on the stuff that catches your fancy. And there's such a wealth of like books, articles, podcasts that you can then look at if you're interested in those. For philosophy, I read the book Think by Simon Blackburn, which I think is recommended as quite a good introduction. And although you can get into kind of reading the actual pieces of philosophy by philosophers, you don't have to. There's some really good material which kind of covers the issues without getting into the kind of primary source material. And for politics, I did some work experience, which I found quite helpful.
Marvellous. And now moving to Matthew.
Okay, so one thing about geography that makes it slightly different to the other subjects we've looked at here is that school geography is so different to university geography. So it's they may be similar issues, but the way you deal with them is completely night and day. So one of the really important things I found was just to explore the breadth of the subject and sort of to test where the limits are, by just doing your extended reading, just following what you're interested in. And as a sign of this, for example, geography was my least favorite subject at A-level, but because I'd done all this extra reading and because sort of engaging with the subject, following the news, for example, seeing where that took me, and I knew that I wanted to do it. So I think that really shows how important doing this kind of supercurricular reading is. In terms of like books or things I access, popular stuff that's through concepts such as the Anthropocenes is really good, but like regional focused stuff, such as I read Richard Dowden's book called Africa, and it's a really like scholarly but readable overview of the continent. And so just follow what you're passionate about reading. Like, don't see this as a chore, see this as like you're going to spend 3 years of your life studying this or more. And so you've got to sort of really almost like escape the bounds of the school, the bounds that get imposed on your subject by school.
That was excellent. I love that. I love the idea of escaping the boundaries of the subject at A level. And of course, there has to be boundaries for A levels because, you know, they've got specific stuff to teach, but you have an opportunity to, yeah, to kind of wrestle free of it and, still do well in your A level, but, go beyond it. I really like that. Okay, so any links that any of you guys mentioned or sources, please type them into the chat. Okay, so let's go through some of these ideas that I've got down. So, yeah, I think that everyone's been talking about this book and that book and this resource, but what do you actually do with them? Well, you need to read them or listen to them or whatever it is that is the nature of the source that you're looking at. But I just think that you might be feeling maybe you're too busy to do this. But if you think about it, if you analyze your day, you might find there's some dead time, there's some free time that you could fill with some of this stuff. So maybe you might do it jogging, or you might do it when you're walking the dog. You might find you just got slow evenings where you're not doing much. We're in a lockdown, so it's probably slow evenings characterize what our last year probably. So you might find you've got some time to fill. But crucially, I think we don't want you to just read something and then put it away again. We want you to kind of savor it somehow and save it. So we want you to record somehow your thoughts about it. So that's not just copying everything down. That's your annotations, your interpretations, things you might want to follow up later. I think those are crucial, and keeping one single file or like computer area or whatever for your thoughts is important, I think. But then actually, and this is the bit everyone misses, or some people miss out, there's a next step, and that's actually talking about the stuff that you're reading, finding somebody to talk to about it. So that could be the mirror. It doesn't matter if there's actually no one there in a way. It's probably better if there is somebody, but it doesn't have to be an expert. You could Zoom call your gran, you could call a friend, maybe your teacher will want to listen, but find a way of verbally talking through the things that you've been doing, because that's how to make sense of it. It's about digesting intellectually. So reading something, writing some notes down, and then finding someone to talk to about it. I think doing all of those steps might be really nice. But yeah, I mean, I think having heard from all the panelists about what they did, you can probably see there is no single path that you need to follow. We're giving you suggestions, but we want you to make this your own. So don't feel like you have to do what we're telling you. So I've got a paradoxical, a juxtapose, you know what I mean, slide next, because I'm going to give you an example of how you could go through, thank you, Catherine, and use a particular technique to analyze or evaluate some of the stuff that you're reading. Okay, so this is where this session is getting a bit experimental, but let's see how it goes. All right, so I'm going to advise and talk about critical thinking, which is a kind of tactic you might employ, you might decide to employ. You don't have to, you can do it your own way, but this might help. And it's all taken from Open University Critical Thinking Guide, which you can Google and read all 20 pages if you want to. But I've tried to condense it all into a smaller bite-size couple of slides. So I think this has got relevance to most subjects. If you want to do maths, then you might be saying, well, I'm not sure if this is quite appropriate. I just need to do more maths. So I totally get that. And you'll already be doing this in different bits of your life already. You'll certainly be doing critical thinking at school, but you might also, when you're doing cooking or trying to figure out how to sort out some arguments between your friends or something. So you'll already be doing it. And it's all about examining ideas and weighing them up. So you're not just reading something blindly and just thinking, oh, I'm looking forward to ticking this one off. You're getting properly critically engaged in it. So it's about analysing and evaluating something that you might decide to read. And I'd advise starting with something quite small and short, and then see if you can expand it out. So it's about evaluation, but another thing that you can do is try to synthesize. So you might decide, right, I'm going to try and judge whether the government's lockdown easing plan is a sensible one. So I'm going to look at the effectiveness of masks. I'm going to look at the vaccine rollout. I'm going to look at treatment. I'm going to look at ventilating rooms, and I'm going to try and gather all that together and try and come up with my own, lockdown easing strategy or something. So that's about synthesizing, getting different bits of information and putting them together. Ultimately, what I think critical thinking about is being really cynical and critical and not believing stuff. It's very easy to read like a BBC article or something, which is actually what we're about to do together, and think, well, this is just the gospel truth. It's the BBC, so it must be true. But actually, what is quite good to do is to not believe it and see if you can find weaknesses in arguments. So questioning things. But the other thing that we want you to do, and this has been picked up by our helpers very well, is read something and bear in mind that it might trigger other thoughts. So that's also part of critical evaluation. All right, so what we're going to do, I'm going to use the panelists as my guinea pigs now, is we're going to look at this BBC article. So Kathryn's going to put the first slide up. So this is an article by Nick Tringle, and it's about false tests ruining the return to school. Now you can see the URL there, and I'm just going to copy and paste it into the chat.
I've just put it in the chat.
Oh, you can do that. That's good. Yeah. All right. So this was written about 2 weeks ago, and I think it's really fun to critically evaluate news or media articles, but because they're often written so quickly that it's quite easy to pick holes in them. So you can start with a BBC article, or even easier to pick apart something like the Daily Mail, and then you can try doing this with some more substantial articles, I'd say. So we're actually going to read this together, and I'm going to get you to think carefully about it, and then I'm going to use the panelists to see what their ideas are. They've never seen this article before, not unless they read it by coincidence. So I've got some questions for us to bear in mind when we're reading this, which is in a slide a bit further down. So do you want to share those questions, Kathryn? It's also spoiling my Chris Whitty joke.
Yeah, I'll put them I'll copy and paste them into the chat. But if anyone's watching this on a different device that's struggling, don't worry, we'll be coming to this in a couple of slides time so you can have a little look at the questions that we're thinking about.
Yeah, so if you can't see the chat, the kind of questions that we're looking at are, what does this article claim? So what's the actual kind of point of the article? And what's the main thrust? So essentially, like, what's the main thrust of the argument, and what evidence does it use? And are you convinced by the evidence? So does the evidence sway you to believe the claim of the article? And you'll be used to probably just reading things and automatically believing them, but you have to kind of question, be a bit more cynical sometimes. Also, we're looking at assumptions. So are there any assumptions in this article that might be false or questionable? So, a solid assumption is that tomorrow the sun will come up. That's a very solid assumption, but are there weaker assumptions in this article? But then also, what I would love you to do, and this is a key part, I think, of critical thinking, is what's missing? Like, what else would you have liked to have seen in this article to convince you more? So what should there have been? So if you were writing this article and you could literally try and write a better article, what would you include? And a final thing to think about is, what might the next steps be? So is there anything in this article that's triggered a thought where you're thinking, oh, actually, I'd quite like to read something else on something related? So I want you to think about arguments, assumptions, and how convincing they are, and then what the next steps are. All right, so the helpers, this is new to them, so they're hopefully feeling focused. Now I'm going to read it out, but I don't want it just to be my voice. So Fran, you are going to be Rachel Stewart. So when we get to the Rachel Stewart quote, that's you. Then Gus, you are Dr. Rachel Clark. So that's going to be your quote. Maddie, you're Sunil Bhopal. You are a child health expert at Newcastle University. And finally, Catherine, you are Matt Hancock. Right, so we go to the first slide, and I'm going to be everything else. So like I'm going to be Nick Triggle. All right, so here we go. So I want you, if you've got a pen or any way of making notes, please do, including panelists, that is, although they might be frantically answering Q&A questions. And just, try and think critically as we go through this article. All right, COVID-19, false results, ruining return to school. Children in England are being unfairly punished by the insistence that they must abide by incorrect positive results from rapid COVID tests, experts say. Reports have emerged of pupils having to isolate after testing positive at school using the on-the-spot checks, only for a more reliable follow-up lab-based PCR test to find them negative. Parents said it was ruining the return to school. Rapid tests at home or in workplaces can be overruled by a lab test. But the government has insisted this cannot happen for tests done in school, although it has been unable to explain why. Pupils at secondary schools, of which there are around 4 million, are being offered 3 lateral flow tests following their return to school. But because the infection rates are so low, the Royal Statistical Society believes more of the positive results produced this week could be wrong than right. The children of Rachel Stewart from Oxfordshire have fallen foul of this policy. Her 16-year-old son tested positive via the rapid test done at school, and he and his 2 younger sisters are having to isolate.
We immediately got a PCR test done. I use these rapid tests for work, and that is what we do. It came back negative, but we were told that they still had to isolate. It was so upsetting for them. They have already been out of school for 2 months, and now to miss more when there is no reason for is incredibly frustrating and upsetting. It has ruined the return to school. I support the idea of testing, but I have withdrawn consent for any more testing at school.
Sorry, that was quite a hard quote to read, wasn't it? Dr. Rachel Clark, an NHS doctor, is another person who has been affected. She said her son and 30 other pupils are out of school after 1 tested positive with a lateral flow test, despite a PCR test later confirming the individual was negative.
You really, really couldn't make this up, she said in a tweet. The idea of entire classes of children being kept out of school for 10 days due to 1 false positive test is awful.
Their concerns are being echoed by experts in the field. Sunil Bhopal, an expert in child health at Newcastle University, said the policy was wrong, suggesting it smacked of a government that was not prioritising children enough. He said,
"It is so painful what happens when children are put last. It is a recurring theme of the pandemic response."
The false positive rate for rapid tests is low. Estimates have put it at around 0.1%, but given the large numbers being offered the test, thousands of pupils could be incorrectly told they are infected this week and next. But even if a follow-up PCR test finds they are negative, it cannot override the results of the rapid test, meaning those pupils, their families and any close contacts will need to isolate at home. It is unclear why the government has adopted different policies for tests done at home and at school. In a statement, Health Secretary Matt Hancock said the approach being taken would
help detect asymptomatic cases quickly,
preventing the virus from entering schools and colleges. Marvellous. So I know that was a bit ridiculous, but I feel that if I just said, I'll read that for a minute, then it would be very, very hard for you all to focus. But, you know, reading so brilliantly by my helpers who have a future in amateur dramatics, I think hopefully made your synapses fire. All right, so I'm not going to get the participants, the year 12s, to start coming up with ideas. I'm actually going to get you guys, you undergraduates, so to comment. So perhaps put your hand up or just unmute or something. What do you think the main argument of this article is?
I think that, sorry, I realised I didn't actually talk in that article, but yeah, shame to be last selected. But yeah, it does seem that the idea is what I get from reading that is that it's not ready. The testing system is not ready to cope with children being back in school, and that seems like the brunt of the article, really, just at a very simple face value assessment.
Okay, yeah. And there's also like the kind of headline of the article, I guess, which also gives you clues as to kind of the thrust, really. All right, so I think the main thing is the evidence. So what is the evidence that these false positives are ruining the return to school? So we've got 2 ideas. False positives are happening and it's ruining the return to school. So you've got this kind of link between the 2. Maddie.
Oh, good. That worked. Well, we only hear from people who believe that it is ruining the return to school. We don't hear from anyone arguing the other side, which is interesting. And I know it says that the government hasn't given a reason, but they could have potentially found someone who thinks differently, or who thinks that children should have to stay at home, even if their PCR test is negative. So it's very much one-sided.
Yes, there's definitely balance issues, and someone like Chris Whitty, who seems to be a bit of a theme, like he would tend to, if you listen to his language, it does tend to be a bit more. It's not like this article. It's a bit more, the evidence suggests that, or it could be argued that he's just a bit. He's an example of somebody who's from an academic background who tends to use more balanced language. But anyway, so there's balance issues definitely. Matthew.
One thing that struck me in this, reading this article, was its use of vox pop. So the use of quotes from the public, which is a technique to look out for in journalism, because unlike an academic article in which there must be an attempt at sense of sampling or capturing a particular demographic sort of representatively, in news articles, vox pop is just drawn from a single person. We have no idea how representative this is of the of society as a whole.
Yeah, right. Because there's basically two angry parents and an expert, and that's all that's the kind of sources of this complaint. So yeah, I think that's definitely something to bear in mind, that it's just a vox pop type thing. Guss?
Yeah, I think while we might not expect an article on the BBC to go deep into all of the evidence, there's only one kind of real figure, which is this estimate of a false positive test rate. And, there's no indication of trying to kind of say how many false positives they think there are, or how many children they think are going to be affected, or pointing to even just one study to kind of back it up, or giving a contrary figure for the false positives. So they're not leaning heavily on actual data or studies.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things about COVID, one of the hallmarks of COVID has been constant graphs. There's graphs everywhere. And it does seem like a very data-heavy pandemic, as pandemics go. It's a data-heavy one. So, yeah, you'd think we've got a couple of quotes, but actually maybe what we need to know is actually how many false positives have there been, and how many schools have been closed or whatever. So there's no real data apart from this 0.1% figure, which is 1 in 1,000, isn't it? Which does, I don't know, strikes me as a number that someone's just made up anyway. So there's real evidence problems there. Guss and Matthew, I'm presuming your hands are down, or are they up again now? Matthew, did you want to say something? No, he's gone. All right. So I was just thinking from a medical point of view. So Fran might comment, but it might be somebody else, or a kind of life science point of view. What do you think of an article like this, having been studying medicine for a couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, because it almost, with topics such as this, it almost takes a popular scientist approach to quite like a medical topic, and it's so important that you kind of keep that perspective almost, because as I think we've mentioned before, you can get caught up in the statistics, and you can. I think one important thing that I noticed, and kind of going back to the use of the statistics, is how crucial the way you present numbers can be. So I thought it was quite interesting that in this article they mentioned the statistic of 0.1%, and at first glance, as they mentioned, it could seem quite small, but given the large numbers of people being tested, it translates into quite a large number of people who may be getting false positives. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important to keep that into perspective, because oftentimes you find people saying there has been a change of 0.1%, there's been a change of 90%, for example, but without having the full picture of the numbers and the parameters. And so for example, a change of 90%, it could be a change from 1 to 1.8, and although 90% looks like a very big number at first, it actually translates to a very small change. And similarly here, 0.1% looks like a very small number, but it actually translates to a lot of pupils. So I think it was quite interesting how the article actually took into account both the statistic and what it looked like in actual practice, which is not what I find when I tend to read articles that might have like a biased take. So I guess as a scientist, as a medical student, I appreciate that kind of unbiased front. But yeah, sorry, I've went on for quite a while there.
That's good. That's good. So yeah, we do. It does. You know, we're picking holes in this article, but at least it does kind of make it clear that 0.1% actually equates to a lot of people in this case. But yeah, there's other statistics that. I mean, I look at the Daily Mail purely for research purposes. And if you look at the Daily Mail, they're constantly twisting statistics out of proportion and not really explaining things. And it's been another feature of the pandemic. So yeah, that's interesting. Alex.
Yeah, sorry, just to keep going on the 0.1% figure. It's not referenced at all as to where this has come from. This could have been just one journalist going to another. Does 0.1% seem right? Yeah, that seems about right. We'll put it in. For all we know, that's literally what happened. They could have just gone onto the street and asked anyone, what percentage do you think it would be? That they haven't said is the point. So if they bothered to put who actually said that or any studies backing that up at all, then it would have a lot more credence than it has at the moment, and even then it's not even in a particularly prominent place. It's between two dashes in the bottom to lower middle of the article. It's not, there's clearly not a lot of confidence that they've put on that figure. It just seems like they're trying to put it there for the sake of seeming slightly scientific, even though, yeah, the rest of the article doesn't really give that impression.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's and there's a vague reference to the Royal Statistical Society at one point as well, and that's kind of just hovering there. And I think you could say the same about the expert commentary. It doesn't really map onto the argument very well. So yeah, all in all, it's a bit woolly there. Guss?
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing I think the article's done well is that there's a few points where it kind of points to, for example, I think on the first slide it said, oh, they'd reached out to the government and they hadn't got a response or something. So I feel like they've done a job of trying to explore the issue to at least one further step and see if they can find out more. So they haven't just left the argument without any opposition or any deeper thought. They've tried to explore, what might be the reasons? Is there someone we can talk to about this?
Yeah, so they might have been frustrated. Nick might have been frustrated himself when he was writing the article that he couldn't get the information back, but he had the deadline to fulfill. So, there's journalistic kind of restrictions that academic articles that don't have, maybe, which we're thinking of reasons to be forgiving of it. Does anyone have any comments about what you'd like to have, what this research might have triggered, or what else you would like to know to make this argument more waterproof? Is there anything else, or watertight, not waterproof? Is there anything else that you think should have been included other than what we've talked about already?
I think just really the kind of absolute numbers. So like how many people have been said. I think it's said at some point, parents have said that this is well, how many? Was it just like 2 parents? Because that's technically plural, so you can call it parents, but you don't know whether it's 2 or whether it's 10,000. You just need some more specific numbers. And it's all very well putting 0.1%, but where does that come in with the fact that you're taking 0.1% of 10 million?
Fantastic. All right, so I would really like you all to do this, to have a go at analysing some information, anything you like, and yeah, try and do this kind of critical thinking. All right, so yeah, just if you're still wondering about, well, what kind of things could I look at, because I don't want to look at journalistic articles about COVID, or that's not the article that I want to do on COVID. Well, the thing is, there's just so much, and I think the helpers have said and typed so much in terms of other opportunities, but I just thought I'd go through a couple of other examples quickly to finish. So you could look at, if you're more artistic, you could look at some of the online exhibitions that are happening. So there's kind of walkthroughs that you can look at for some art galleries and museums. The one there, top right, is Our Wei, who is a Chinese artist who one of his many amazing installations was all these stools just thrown around and suspended in the air. And what I'd love you to do is just, if you're interested in art, is to look at a piece of art online and just try and critique it yourself without cheating by looking at the write-up. So you could do that. This is about in China, they have the traditional rural household stools, and it's a comment about how things were modernized in China, and kind of rural life was turned upside down. So it's a comment about that. Or what you could do is look at a series of radio articles. So there's been this brilliant series, of course, on BBC Radio 4 called How to Vaccinate the World. And there's like 20 episodes. And what you should do, I think, is be a panel member in your head. So listen to the episodes and see, well, how would you contribute? Pause it and see what you would say when asked a question. So you can kind of be an expert. And I think that's quite fun today to do. If you're interested in engineering or physics, and Alex and Jonathan are probably going to laugh at my example now, but please do if you like. You can just look at the world around you and see what's interesting about it. I think U-bends are quite interesting. They're a very simple and genius piece of an invention, and figure out why is it like that. So the U-bend, Alex and Jonathan, tell me if this is wrong. But it's just a really simple design to separate the kind of noxious smell of the sewers with a house, but just by separating it with this little bit of water that will be refreshed every time you flush or use the sink. Genius. But can you find other household objects, like, I don't know, your bike or something, and figure out how they work? And I don't know, maybe some maths behind them somehow. You could read some controversial books. So I don't know if Matthew has ever read Guns, Germs and Steel. It's a very kind of famous book where this guy called Jared Diamond, who's very controversial, writes an interesting book about why the Europeans went over to South America and kind of smashed that continent in a matter of a few decades. Why wasn't it the other way around? Why didn't the Incas sail over to Europe and do what we did to them? It's quite an interesting idea. So you could read something that's deliberately controversial just because it's quite fun to engage. And you could also look at controversies of the past. So the weird kind of picture of somebody's burial. It's a really interesting example in archaeology from about 150 years ago, where some Victorian archaeologists found a burial of a Viking warrior. And then they do what archaeologists do. They write up what they're seeing. So they're like, he is a warrior because he has a sword next to him, and he was clearly buried with some important goods. So he was probably quite a prominent tribesman, and he's buried with an animal, which shows that he would ride on horseback, blah, blah, blah. And then more recently, some female archaeologists looked at the same site and did some analysis of the bones. And they were like, it's a woman, clearly a woman. So the bones suggest it's a woman, but the Victorian archaeologists just presumed it was a man because she was buried with a sword. So I don't know, you can look at how our understanding of things have changed in the past, and that's quite a nice way of getting involved. Finally, there's a graph here. World's highest COVID death rates are in countries with majority overweight populations. And this is some interesting research that's done recently. And this is like data heavy. This is the kind of data we were craving in the last article. And in countries that have high obesity levels, death rates have been higher for COVID. But then for countries with low obesity, generally the death rates have been low. And I think obviously there's a correlation there. But is there anything to be questioned with the data there? Because, trying to figure out if someone's died of COVID is actually not as easy as you might think. So there might be some, you can question the data and see where they gathered that information and see if there's any potential weaknesses. So you can do whatever you want. It's just, the world is quite interesting and there's plenty of stuff out there. All right, so I think we've still got a few questions to answer just to finish off. And we want to get the helpers involved again. Kathryn, do you want to do this bit or shall I carry on?
Yeah, I'm happy to do this next bit. So we've got a few questions coming. We've been typing questions to lots of them, so do have a look if you're wondering why your questions disappeared from the Q&A box. A few people have been asking about like really specific stuff, their subject, what we recommend. And as we've been saying throughout this session, really go with your interest. There isn't like just one thing that you can do. One of the questions I think I'll quickly ask and pose to perhaps Joe and also Fran, because I think you mentioned the New Scientist magazine. How would you record reading something like that, weekly or monthly?
Yeah, so with any kind of article subscription that you're doing on a regular basis, I think it's may be worth, if you have the characters for it, maybe mentioning in your personal statement that, you know, for the past 3 months, for the past year, for the past 9 months, you've been actually quite engaged in scientific magazines such as The New Scientist. Don't be shy to, you know, almost name drop the periods of times in your personal statement or possibly in your interview. But I think it's really important, instead of just limiting it to just listing, that you also reflect on a particular aspect or area that you found particularly interesting, so that you're not just saying I did this. For example, in the New Scientist article, I found a really interesting, in the New Scientist magazine, I found a really interesting article about COVID vaccinations, or Australia and how they managed the pandemic, and then go on to explore that, so that it becomes less like you're just listing and more that like you're discussing in quite a bit of detail, whilst also specifying that you've been reading it for 9 months, if that makes sense.
Perfect, thanks very much, Fran. We've got a few people asking questions about EPQs, and do they have to do an EPQ, and is it going to be an advantage to their application? So that's that extended project qualification that we mentioned. You won't be disadvantaged at all if you haven't done an EPQ. Plenty of schools don't offer it. At school, I've never even heard of what an EPQ was. I only found out a couple of years ago when I started my job, and had lots of students asking about it. So all these other aspects of subject exploration that we've been talking about, they're just as valuable as an EPQ. So you don't have to have a formalized essay in order for something to be valuable. It can just be your own kind of recorded thoughts and reactions to podcasts you've been listening to, and stuff that you've been reading, and stuff that you've been researching in your spare time. I think we'll go with one more question that we've had a couple of. How do you balance doing supercurricular activities for like multidisciplinary courses? So something like PPE that Guss is doing, or even Maddie with French and German. So how do you balance it when you're trying to do these supercurricular activities, but for more than one subject?
I think it's important to show that you're interested in all three, otherwise, or however many it is you're doing where there's multiple, because otherwise you obviously wouldn't want to be applying for that course if you're not interested in all parts. But also you shouldn't try and stick to like a formula, I think, where you're rigidly splitting down to do the exact same amount for each, because in your position, you probably are more interested in one specific part than another, and you haven't had the experience probably to engage with all of them equally. Like, for example, I answered one of the questions that I spent a lot more of my time and talking in the personal statement and generally kind of doing supercurricular stuff on economics than philosophy, just because that was what I'd kind of engaged with more and had more of a focus on. And I don't think that's a bad thing, as long as you are mentioning everything. If you do really look into what you're interested in, that's where you're going to come across as interested. And that's what you want, is for people to be able to see that.
I think as well, you can draw links between them to a certain extent, because it's likely that if they're put together as a degree, they're going to have things in common. So like in my personal statement, I talked about the Holocaust, and I had watched a film about the Holocaust in French, a French film, but obviously that's a massive theme in German cultural studies. So that was a way of sort of linking the two languages together.
Thanks very much. I think that kind of brings us to the last of the kind of main questions. If there's anything really specific that we haven't been able to answer today, so a few people asking about their particular circumstances and A-levels, then feel free to email Joe and I at these email addresses on the bottom right. So I'm at Cambridge and Joe's at Oxford. And if we can't help you directly, we'll pass the questions on to someone who definitely can. So we hope you found this session useful. We'd like to point out the other things that we're running that are coming up that are also going to continue to aid you in things like subject exploration and applying for universities. So this evening we'll be opening registration for the taster lecture series that we're running. So hopefully everyone will find something in there that they find interesting and would like to come along to. And I'll be putting all those links under this Find Out More website here just after this session, so you can come along to those. At the end of April, we've got a session with our St. Catherine's College welfare officer, who's lovely, and is going to be chatting about kind of mental welfare coping strategies as you're trying to balance, academic workloads and thinking about university and a pandemic. She's going to chat to you a bit about that and give you some support and guidance. And then a lot of you have been asking this evening about personal statements and how you're going to translate all these supercurricular activities into personal statements. So please do come along in May for our personal statement workshops, where we'll be going into more detail about how you can write an effective personal statement and how you can talk about the supercurricular activities that you're hopefully thinking of doing or will do at some point. And then we've got admissions futures Q&As in June and open day events in July. So you've got all these opportunities where you can come along and ask our admissions staff, our fellows, that's what we call the teachers at Oxford and Cambridge, and our students. You've got so many opportunities to ask us your questions over the coming months. We hope you found this useful. Best of luck on your kind of subject exploration journey. And we hope that we'll see loads of you at the taster sessions that we've got coming up. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks to all our panelists. You're all fantastic.
I forgot to thank the panelists. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Joe, for being a great host. Bye, everyone.